All right, the month of June is not over. Recruiting in June is not over. Pitt's going to get more commitments probably this month and certainly from recruits who visited this month. But with the official visits in the books, we talked yesterday about the final official visit weekend and what Pitt landed out of that weekend. I thought we should take a look back at the 3 official visit weekends that happened this month, who Pitt brought in, who they got, who's still on the board, and who might join this recruiting class. So let's do a bit of a June recap. Even though it's only the 25th, there's still 5 days left in the month. Lots can happen between now and then. But let's do a little bit of a June recap here on your Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Tuesday in the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, where all the Pitt recruiting, football, basketball, recruiting info, everything is there at Panther-Lair.com. All the Pitt sports coverage you could possibly hope for, and message boards to talk to other Pitt fans about it. We provide the content, you provide the community and the communication and the conversation and anything else that starts with C that you can possibly think of. It's a good time if you're a Pitt fan, you like to talk to other Pitt fans about Pitt sports, and the place to do it, the best place to do it, the best online community of Pitt sports fans is right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So make sure you check that out. And of course, like we always ask you to do, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the place we put all of our exclusive Pitt video content, whether it's the morning Pitt videos like this one every day of the week, Monday through Friday, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Me and Jim Hammett hang out and talk about Pitt sports with you. We do that tomorrow night. Or we have press conferences, interviews, highlights, all kinds of things, practice video, everything. It's right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You want to make sure you don't miss any of it, so subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So let's take stock of the month of June, what it meant for Pitt with the official visits. Of course, they entered the month of June with 6 committed prospects. Mason Heinschel, the quarterback, wide receivers Tony Kinsler and Bryce Yates. Kinsler with the potential to play kind of running. I mean, we're going to talk about offensive skill guys this week, and we'll talk about them a little bit today, some of the position versatility that some of those guys have. Tony Kinsler, who committed during the spring, could play a little running back, could play a little receiver, could play some slot back, speed back. It's probably one of these terms that we're going to overuse a lot over the next few months or years. We'll see what that ends up being. Trevor Summers, the defensive lineman, the first commitment in the class, defensive tackle. He was committed since like December or January maybe. Shep Turk from Thomas Jefferson, and then the most recent commitment prior to the June official visits, Elijah Dotson, the defensive back, the safety prospect from Michigan who committed. So 6 guys committed to Pitt prior to June, and then the official visits started. What did Pitt get over the course of this month? Well, they brought 29 recruits to campus for official visits. Now, it included those 6 guys. So you're looking at 23 uncommitted prospects who came to Pitt for official visits this month. And out of those 23, they landed commitments from 11 of them. So if you look at the whole group, right, 29 official visitors in the month of June, thus far, 17 of them are committed to Pitt. The 6 guys who are already committed before the month started, and then the 11 who committed this month. And I think that number could continue to grow, that out of 29 official visitors, they could end up with as many as like 20 commitments, which would be a heck of a batting average. I tell you, it would be a heck of a batting average. They've always, you go back to the beginning for Pat Narduzzi, you go back to like the winter of 2015, the first run of official visits, and really a streak that they kept up for quite some time. They have a remarkably high hit rate on official visits. This staff, through a number of changes on the recruiting staff, and I think they've gotten better as the recruiting staff has grown and developed and evolved over the years, but this staff has traditionally done a really good job with official visits and converting official visits into commitments. And that was certainly the case back in the day when the official visits were just in December and January. I think it's continued now into, when they have the June official visits. I think to some extent, the last few years we've seen weekends, official visit weekends, where they bring in a lot of guys. Or they'll bring in 20 guys or 24 recruits. there you're probably not going to have a particularly high hit rate in the month of on those official visit weekends when you have that many guys visiting. Not just not a matter of missing on guys, but there are going to be guys that you just don't even that don't necessarily have a spot, but you're bringing them in on official visits because you might end up taking them. So you don't necessarily have a high hit rate. If they end up signing or ultimately having commitments from 20 out of 29 guys or 21 out of 29 official visitors in the month of June, that's a really high hit rate. Probably one that rivals some of their other really remarkable and strong hit rates over the past 10 years. It'd be really good. And I think it's very, very possible that they'll end up with 20 commitments out of these 29 guys. Now, whether they end up signing all of them, that remains to be seen because, as we know, commitments in June and July don't always lead to signings in December, but most of them will. This is where the bulk of the class is probably going to be built, is right here in these June official visits, these June commitments, these July commitments that often stem from the June official visits. So that's the basic numbers. 29 guys visited. As of right now, 17 of them are committed to Pitt. 11 out of 23 uncommitted prospects committed to Pitt during their official visits or shortly thereafter. And again, that's a number that could climb and probably will climb. The first official visit weekend was the biggest weekend of all. They had 14 recruits come, the biggest weekend of the year at least. 14 recruits here on official visits. 4 of those 14 were already committed to Pitt when they arrived. And then out of the other 10, they got 5 to commit during the official visit. Pretty good start to the official visit season right there. Max Hunt, the tight end, committed. Justin Thompson, linebacker, committed. Julian Anderson, sort of a surprise visitor, a guy we found out about sort of late in the weekend, ended up committing. Defensive end prospect, originally from New Jersey, moved to Florida, and now is going back to New Jersey for a post-grad year. He committed. And then 2 guys that I really like, 2 offensive skill guys, Demarion Folks and Jakarian Turner, both committed that weekend. And I think they were big scorers for Pitt. I think those guys are really good offensive playmakers. I think they're fast. I think they're explosive. Again, we're going to talk more about offensive skill guys probably tomorrow, unless some big news comes up that we talk about instead on the Morning Pitt. But I really like the additions of Turner and Folks, and they both came from that first official visit weekend. Second weekend, the numbers went down a little bit. They had 8 recruits on campus for official visits. Only one of them, Shep Turk, was already committed prior to the visit. Out of the other 7, they landed 2. Not a great hit rate right there. And coming directly out of the weekend, there was only one Pat Narduzzi commitment tweet through the weekend, and that ended up being Akram El-Nagmi, the offensive lineman from England, who was here on an official visit, previously committed to Eastern Michigan, flipped his commitment to Pitt during his visit. Later in that week, a few days later, I think it was a few days later, it might have even been, it was a few days later, Sean Lee from Harrisburg committed to Pitt, announced his commitment. Maybe he gave something of a silent verbal over the weekend during his official visit. Either way, he ended up committing. So they got 2 guys. It looked a little grim that they only got 1 out of 7 on the weekend. 2 out of 7, still not a great number. And you'd like to see them get maybe a couple other guys from that group. There were a few defensive backs who visited that weekend, Josh Gurrier and Cole Woodson. In addition to Lee, I think the Pitt coaches were really hoping they could get all 3. They got 1, but Gurrier and Woodson are still out there. We'll talk about those guys in a minute. The third official visit weekend came this past weekend. 7 recruits visited. One of them was already committed. Elijah Dotson was the official visitor this past weekend who was already committed to Pitt. Of the other 6, Pitt landing commitments from 4 of them. Manny Taylor, the linebacker, who's got some pretty impressive wide receiver highlights. Sinquan Smith, the running back, who again is just another explosive playmaker. He's small, but he can make a lot of plays. Torian Chester, an offensive lineman, and then Khalil Sterling, maybe one of the most impressive recruits in this class, or maybe at least the most impressive June commitment that they've gotten, a wide receiver who is just dynamite, just making plays all over the field. Really impressive to watch. Really, just eye-opening. You know what I mean? Like you just jumps off the page, jumps off the screen, and you say, wow, this guy can really play. And so they got those 4 commitments this past weekend. They brought the number of commitments in June, or commitments from the June official visits, up to 11. Remember, I said there were 23 uncommitted recruits who took official visits to Pitt this month. 11 of them committed to the Panthers during the month and mostly on their official visits. That leaves 12 other uncommitted targets, and out of those 12, 3 have already committed to other schools. Aiden Webb, a safety prospect, committed to Oklahoma State. Ezekiel Marcelin, a 4-star linebacker, a cousin or some kin to Jeremiah Marcelin, who signed with Pitt last year. He committed to Miami. And then Quante Gillians, a defensive end, committed to Syracuse, kid from Rochester. It's kind of a hometown school, and Syracuse obviously has a lot of momentum right now. And so you see where that one kind of came through. So, big number. 29 official visitors. 6 of them were already committed. Out of the other 23, Pitt landed 11. Out of the remaining 12, 3 have committed elsewhere. That leaves 9. 9 recruits still on the board. What's the deal with those guys? Well, I think there's some guys that are definitely priorities and some guys that maybe are a little bit lower on the list. Madrid Tucker, we list him as a defensive back. I think he's probably more of a wide receiver. I got to think with Demarion Folks and Ja'Karian Turner and Khalil Sterling and Tony Kinsler and Bryce Yates and Saquon Smith. I mean, that's 6 offensive skill guys. Running backs and receivers. And some of them are more running backs, some of them are more receivers, some of them are a little bit in between. That's 6 receivers and running backs. I got to think at some point, unless there's a can't miss, absolutely cannot say no to this guy prospect, no matter what prospect, I got to think they pause just for a second on the wide receivers and the running backs, just because that's a lot. And I'm not saying they don't need it, but that's a lot. So Madrid Tucker probably sitting this one out. Offensive lineman, Byron Nelson. I don't necessarily know. So the key with the offensive lineman, I posted this on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com yesterday, so you already know this if you've been reading the boards at Panther-Lair.com. I think the goal for Pitt has been to take 4 offensive linemen in this class, 2 tackles and 2 guards. And look, I've been saying this a lot, but it always comes with the caveat that it can change. If the right guy wants to commit, you find room for him. You make room and you bring him in. They've got commitments from, Akramel Nagmi is a tackle. Torian Chester is probably a guard. Shep Turk is an interior lineman. So that leaves 1 tackle spot. Byron Nelson, probably not a tackle. I think he's more of a guard prospect. So I think his spot is largely taken at this point unless something changes down the road somewhere. Denzel Williams and Jordan Fields, though, are tackle prospects, and I think Pitt would like to get one of those 2. I think Pitt will get one of those 2. Williams is looking at Pitt and Boston College. Fields, I think, is probably Pitt, Kansas, or Houston. I like Pitt's chances there. We'll see who they end up with. I think they'll get one of those guys to fill out the offensive line recruiting class with the 2 tackles and the 2 guards. Probably Williams or Fields to go with El Nagmi at tackle, and then Chester and Turk at guard is sort of how I see that class panning out. Across the ball on the other side, linebacker, they've got commitments from Justin Thompson and Manny Taylor. They've taken a couple bigger linebacker classes in the last. They've taken 3 each of the last 2 years, right? 2 years ago, last year's recruiting class, the 2023 recruiting class was Braylon Lovelace and Rasheem Biles and Jordan Bass. This past year, Jeremiah Marcelin and Davin Bruton and Cam Lindsey. And so they've restocked that position to a certain extent. They could stand pat with 2 guys, but they just had Denham Cook on an official visit this past weekend and Bryson Williams a couple weeks ago. I think my hunch is that if one of those guys wants to commit, they will take them and go with 3 linebackers in this class. But it remains to be seen. I think they could be happy with Thompson and Taylor. And just stand pat there. But if the opportunity presents itself to take another talented player, particularly on defense, I don't see this staff saying no to too many guys. At defensive back, they've got Sean Lee committed. They've got, he committed 2 weeks ago after his official visit, Elijah Dotson is committed. He committed in the spring. That's one corner and one safety. What do they take beyond that? It depends. It depends on who they're able to get. I can absolutely see this staff taking 2 corners and 2 safeties. They've got Josh Gurrier as a safety prospect, Cole Woodson as a safety prospect, Mason Alexander as a cornerback prospect, the 4-star who just visited this past weekend, and he's announcing his commitment actually tomorrow morning, I believe. Seems like it'll be between Pitt and Purdue. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. I don't have a great feel on that one just yet. But I could see them hoping to get Alexander to fill a cornerback spot, another cornerback spot in addition to Sean Lee, and then Gurrier or Woodson to fill a safety spot next to Dotson, and then call it there. And maybe tell Gurrier and Woodson, hey, first come, first serve. But then again, we've seen this coaching staff in action. We know how they feel about defensive backs. I could absolutely see them saying, we'll take everybody, be the old bull standing up on top of the hill. Let's walk down there and take all the safeties. I wouldn't be a surprise at all. They probably don't need 3 safeties and 2 corners in this class, although it's certainly trending toward being a larger recruiting class. But I could see them doing it. If it was me, I would probably stand pat with 2 and 2 and then see what pans out by the end of the recruiting cycle. But I could, we know this staff likes defensive backs, right? We know that's what they like to do. So, I think when you look at it, with 17 commitments right now, and there is one outstanding Pat Narduzzi tweet, so it means that there are 18 commitments in the class. 17 of them have been announced. We're waiting to find out when that 18th gets announced. But I think let's just call it the 17 we know about. I think they want, one more offensive lineman, at least 2 more defensive backs, maybe 1 more linebacker. That would put them at 21, and they need defensive linemen. They've got 2 defensive linemen in this class, Julian Anderson, defensive end, and Trevor Summers, a defensive tackle. You can't be done there. And the problem is, there aren't any other guys as options here. You know what I mean? Like I just read you the list of all 9 guys who are uncommitted. There was one other defensive end who took an official visit this month, Quante Gillians, and he's committed to Syracuse. So when I read you the other 9 guys, none of them is a defensive lineman. This is the problem, dude. This is our concern. They need help on the defensive line. And this isn't one of those situations where I'm talking about, well, they need help on the defensive line because they actually need it in 2024, where obviously the recruits aren't, the recruits in this class aren't even going to help in 2025, let alone 24 when they're still in high school. But they need to rebuild the foundation of this position. They took a bigger defensive line class last year. The group coming in as freshmen this year with Isaiah Neal and Francis Brew and or not Isaiah Neal. Isaiah Neal was 2 years ago, but Francis Brew and Jasir Whittington and Ty Uas and Zach Crothers and Sincere Edwards. That's a good-sized class. It's 5 defensive linemen. They need another class of that size. They cannot be done with just 2 defensive linemen in this recruiting class. This recruiting class of 2025 has to have at least 4 defensive linemen, and I would shoot for 5 or 6 if I could get them. Because yes, the transfer portal is going to provide options like Nate Matlack and David Ojebwe and Nick James and Anthony Johnson. But I don't think you'd want to try and go get 4 defensive linemen out of the portal every year. You need to take some bigger recruiting classes so you can start rebuilding a position group that has actually fallen into a little bit of disarray over the last 2 years. Partly due to transfers and partly, but not entirely, due to transfers. Also, partly due in some part to guys just not panning out. Some busts in there. And it happens. It's part of recruiting. But when you have that, and Pitt has had it over the last 3 or 4 recruiting classes, you need to restock. You need to build up the depth where you don't really have any. And so you need another bigger recruiting class here. And so even if it means only taking 4 defensive backs, even if it means only taking 2 linebackers, even if it means only taking 6 running backs and receivers, I think you need to juice the numbers at on the defensive line. And to be honest, with scholarship limits very much up in the air going forward, and with really no clear idea of what your roster is going to look like year to year, there's no reason to take less than 23, 24 recruits in every class, or 25. Load up and sort the numbers out later. Don't put a cap on yourself. If you have an opportunity to get good players and you have a situation that needs to be addressed with numbers, don't put a cap on how many you'll take or what you'll take or what you need. Bring in the guys. Rebuild the roster, especially at a position like defensive line where you need to rebuild the roster. So it's a little concerning that they didn't even, never mind the commitments, they just didn't have that many visitors this month along the defensive line. Julian Anderson, Quante Gillians, that's kind of it. In addition to, Trevor Summers, who was already committed. But in terms of targets, they didn't really bring in many guys. They need to, so that means they're going to have to work through the summer and then into the fall and official visits in the fall and December to try to get more recruits in. I think it will be a pretty considerable misstep if they only sign 2 defensive linemen in December. And I don't think they will only sign 2 defensive linemen in December. But it's going to be interesting to see what they're able to come up with over the next 6 months. Who they're going to be able to come up with over the next 6 months. Who they're going to be able to find to fill those spots in this class, because those spots need to be filled. So 17 commitments as of last night when I looked. The recruiting class was ranked, I think, number 31. This is an ongoing shifting number. It constantly moves. As your school picks up commitments or loses commitments, and then as other schools pick up commitments and lose commitments, that number is going to shift a little bit. And so it was 30 at the beginning of the day yesterday. It was 31 at the end of the day yesterday. We'll see where it is this morning and throughout the day. That team recruiting ranking is going to be all over the place. It'll stabilize to a certain extent at the end of the summer. But as teams keep adding commitments through the end of June and into July, it's going to be kind of all over the place. So don't pay too much attention to the team recruiting ranking right now, but check and see where it is at like mid-August or the end of August, September 1st, somewhere around there. And kind of, then start thinking about the team recruiting rankings. But 17 commitments, a number of positions addressed as they need to be. And then probably some spots they definitely still need to fill in, the defensive line being first and foremost among those. But we'll see what happens. All right, thanks for your time today. Thanks for watching the video. I appreciate it. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you're listening on the audio-only podcast and you refuse to watch the YouTube video, the least you can do is just go over and click the button to subscribe. I won't hold it against you if you do that. At least not for long. All right, don't forget the website, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com to get all your Pitt sports news, football, basketball, and recruiting. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope you had a great Monday and a great start to your week. Enjoy your Tuesday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.